Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me okay. Today I'm going to talk to you about an interesting subject, which is weeds. So usually when we talk about weeds and we hear the word weeds, we think about gardens. But actually, a weed is a plant that is growing in an unwanted place, whether it's a pavement or a garden. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project called More Than Weeds, which I launched. And the idea behind that project is to potentially change our perception of weeds and maybe start thinking about them as white flowers as well as, weeds. So let's start with a few pictures. So these are two pictures of London. One is taken in Canary Wharf, the other one is in Lambeth, near Kennington. And what you can see in those two pictures is the fact that our cities are dominated by concrete. So it's pavements, it's walls, and usually plants are restricted to, areas that we've chosen, planters, areas with trees and tree pits. But sometimes, occasionally, you get plants growing in unwanted place. So, for example, on the right, you see a poppy, which has self-seeded in a pavement. And this is quite a nice picture, I think, which is a bit of a metaphor, of our relationship with nature in cities. But the question I wanted to ask was, were our cities always that way? Were our cities always quite mineral and concreted? And actually, when you look in history, you'll find that it wasn't the case, but weeding was prominent from the 16th century onwards. So on the left, you can see a painting where women are scraping plants that were growing on pavement. And on the right is something quite amusing, which I wanted to share with you. And it's an engraving of a man called the Groundsel Man. And what happened is in Victorian London, you had poor men and women and children as well who would go around in people's gardens, in parks, on pavements as well, to collect some weeds like groundsel. So groundsel is a plant related to dandelion, which you can see on the right. And that plant, they used to collect it, and they would put it in baskets and go in the streets and sell those plants to people who, especially women who had caged birds. They will sell them as food for caged birds. So this was a tradition, that was being done with weeds, something quite unusual. Then obviously what happened is manual weeding stopped, labor-intensive weeding stopped because we discovered weed killer. And they started to appear in the 19th century, and they got really, really more performant and powerful between the two wars. And by the sort of 1970, glyphosate, which is the most used nowadays, was used all around the country by councils, by private gardeners as well. So this is quite a common sight in many parts of the UK now, people spraying in parks and along pavements. And sometimes, when you look at what councils, how councils are managing, public spaces, you actually realize that for many people, they like when things and when green spaces are quite neat and tidy. So this is a sample, for example, of a website called FixMyStreet, where you can report any problems that you have in your streets, anything, like rubbish or or things like that. And actually a lot of people are reporting when plants haven't been cut enough or they haven't been sprayed. And I mean, personally, I think it's a great shame, because those, plants, whether they're part of urban nature, so, that constant war against anything green is really a shame. But something happened this year. In all its sadness with COVID-19, many councils had to obviously, stop spraying. They had to stop spraying, and there was a lot less footfall because people couldn't go out as much. So what started happening is plants were able to grow. I mean, there were loads of headlines with, animals, goats in towns, and animals taking, reclaiming the city. And the same happened with plants. So this is a tweet from someone in Colchester with a really pretty display on the pavements of flowers which hadn't been sprayed. And on the right, this is a newspaper article from Rome, showing plants and grass growing between pavements in Rome. So with that, it has made a change, and some people are starting to think, maybe could we find maybe a way of living with nature in cities? When you look around London, there are over 2,000 different plant species which are thought to occur in London. Not all of them occur on pavements, but at least, probably a couple of hundreds at least that you'll find on pavements. So I've just put on the left a few of the most common ones. So you'll find things like red nettle, which is brilliant for bumblebees. You'll find the very pretty shepherd's purse with its little triangular fruit. Something that a lot of people see is Herb Robert, the one on the top right-hand corner with pink flowers, which has a strong smell. And then the groundsel, which I was mentioning earlier. So that there's a wide diversity of plants, each with different, insects linked to them, and each with different benefits as well. They're not only there, as weeds to annoy people, basically. In tray pits, you'll find another, a range of flora. So these are a couple which I saw. I particularly like the one in the middle, rapeseed. So this is, typically a plant that you'll find in fields, agricultural fields and countryside. But this was in Leicester Square. It was growing in a tree pit in Leicester Square. How did it come there? Did it come as a seed on the tires of a truck? We don't know, but plants are able to spread. They're able to, take advantage of any little bit of soil that they can find. So I think it's quite a fascinating world and something that we rarely talk about. Sometimes you'll find garden plants as well, which escape from the garden. So the one on the left, you may have seen them on pavements. They're particularly common around pubs because this is a lobelia, which is a plant from South Africa. And the seeds they're very, very small, and they tend to germinate in the cracks. So, and so when you've had, hanging baskets from pubs, usually you'll find them the year after in the pavements around. So, some plants like that are quite interesting because they come from gardens, and you don't know what's gonna grow the next year. So I was mentioning, that rape plants are spread through so many different ways. The poppy on the right, very pretty plants, is usually spread by birds because they love the seeds. So the poppy seed heads, they really love them. And so you might, have one growing in your garden without any idea of how it came there. It's probably, been dispersed by a bird. And as a question I often get asked is, are those plants useful? Are they just weeds there to annoy us, or are they actually useful? And the answer is yes. Those plants serve as food for insects. When they finish flowering, they're actually still useful because they've got seeds, which can be used by birds. I mentioned, poppy earlier. But a lot of those plants have got, seeds that the birds can use. In Lambeth, I've seen quite a lot of goldfinches, feeding on some seed heads, especially, even grasses. When you have long grass, they can feed on those. They can reduce pollution. Some of those plants are really good at trapping pollutants on their leaves, so reducing the amount of pollution that you have in the air. In tree pits, when you have a plant cover in the tree pits, it can increase or improve the health of the tree because it avoids the soil from being compacted. Some of them are really pretty. It's difficult not to find some of them really pretty. And also, many of those plants are actually edible or have medicinal properties. I wouldn't necessarily advise you to harvest plants and forage on pavements. But if you have one of those plants that you identify on a pavement and then you see it in a park or in your garden, then you can obviously try to use it, learn how to use it, read a little bit more about it. So I think those plants, you know, have a variety of use. And with the lockdown, I mean, I've had, you know, people contact me say it's for the first time I've actually noticed, you know, the nature around me. There's been plants growing on the pavement which I had no idea, you know, existed. So I think that you know, use is not to be ignored. The fact that it connects us with nature somehow, and I think that's quite beautiful. So yeah, a couple of extra pictures of those plants. So the big question is, can we learn to live with those plants? And around Europe, there's been initiatives to let plants, you know, plant live basically, and to try to live with plants a little bit more. In the UK and in London, so in the UK, about 98% of councils still use herbicide to kill pavement plants, but there is progress. And I'm delighted, I mean, if you haven't seen the news, I'm delighted to say that Lambeth is phasing out glyphosate in 2021. So this year there was an option to opt out of spraying in your street, which I think was really good. And this is something, you know, that is probably going to spread in other councils in the UK. In London, a few councils have already phased out glyphosate or are working to reduce it. And many parks are no longer using it, for example. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience. In France, glyphosate was banned in all public spaces in 2017 and in private garden in 2019. And initially, you know, it sparked a lot of complaints. People were saying, you know, oh, this is really dirty, plants growing on my pavement. It looks ugly, like this, you know, the picture here. But actually, cities had to, you know, do campaigns to explain to people, you know, as I said before, those plants are useful. Those plants are part of nature, and you know, nature should be given a space in cities as well as in the countryside. So they did like billboards like this one, where they were explaining, you know, why plants were coming back on pavements, the fact that it's not dirty. It has to be managed, so it's not about, you know, just letting everything rewild and grow, but it can be managed in a way that, you know, helps biodiversity as well. So the idea was, as I said, moving away from just spraying everything to selective weeding. So you only weed, you know, where you need access, so people don't trample on the plants, or they don't fall on them, that sort of thing. They've also been adapting public spaces for plants. So in the street, for example, they've been allowing people to, you know, grow plants along the walls. And so you end up with quite some quite pretty results, I have to say. Again, you have to ensure that there is a certain width, and we've seen, you know, with COVID-19, the importance of having, you know, white pavements, but at the same time having a street that is, you know, looking good is actually potentially helping, you know, people's mental health and things like that. So it's the idea really to increase biodiversity, increase how streets look, and accept a little bit more, you know, wilderness. So I started More Than Weeds earlier this year, and the interest I've had in the project has been really interesting, as it's been massive as well. So my idea is to you know, organise some walks, raise awareness, also work with local authorities to try and make them, you know, more aware of the need to change their practices, and also of the fact that it could actually, you know, as I said, help the mental health of residents, make the streets more easy to manage if you don't have to, you know, spray all the time. So the idea is to tolerate weeds and potentially even to garden with them. There's been, you know, in some places where plants have been growing, they've actually been so pretty that they've been left there. So there's also an option of, you know, using white flowers, native white flowers in gardens and in flower arrangements. So I think this is, you know, some of those plants are quite pretty naturally. So it's this idea of selective weeding, removing anything that doesn't allow access or that is causing problems like allergies, but otherwise learning to live with more of those plants. And I'll just finish with something quite cute. Around the world, people have been using, urban plants in walls, pavements, to produce Freetarge, which I think is a really cool idea. So it'd be nice to see a bit of that happening in Lambeth as well, I think. Thank you very much. To find out more about the project, you can visit my website, follow me on Instagram, Twitter. I'm delighted to say that I'm going to organise a series of walks around Lambeth, probably around Kennington, Vauxhall, maybe a bit further away as well. But I'm going to organise, some walks to show people what's going on in the streets and on the pavements. What you'll find out is in different areas of the borough, you'll see different types of plants. So it's quite interesting. If anyone is interested, to identify plants or have a walk near where they live, then please contact me and I'll be delighted to help. Thank you very much.